the data environment inside of a B2B company is so different than the data environment inside of a B2C company. Google and Amazon and Etsy, they own your data, basically. But at Slack, the customer owns the data.
I noticed that you're actually monetizing AI.
To me, it's like, what value are we creating now? What value are we going to add in the future? And we really think it's enough to say, hey, maybe we should charge a little bit more.
You were at Slack before and after Salesforce acquisition, buying versus building, and Salesforce chose to buy.
I think it kind of comes down to like Slack is really, really good at user experience and the sort of product-led motion. And Salesforce is really good at getting software into companies. Like they're super, super good at that.
How do you structure your team?
I kind of have broken it into 3 parts of the funnel. So there's awareness and consideration, there's paying, and then there's growing.
A lot of the B2B SaaS companies, they base their pricing on seats, and I see more of a transition to usage.
We don't want people paying for a bunch of seats that they're not using, and we also don't want people to use the product less because they're worried about having to pay for it. So we try to think about both of those things together.
This episode is brought to you by Pendo, the all-in-one product management platform for any type of application. With Pendo, you don't have to bounce around multiple tools to figure out what's really happening inside your product. Pendo makes it easy to answer critical questions about how users are engaging with your product, and then turn those insights into action. Also, you can get your users to do what you actually want them to do. Visit pendo.io/product school to create your free account today and start building better experiences across every single corner of your product. That's pendo.io/product school. Hey everyone, this is Carlos, CEO at Product School and your host on the Product Podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome Jamie DeLanghe, the VP of Product and General Manager at Slack. Slack is a game changer in team communication, transforming how we collaborate with colleagues and organizations. Hope you don't remember those days before Slack where we all had to use email big time and send endless threads to people, forward those threads to others, copy others, and so on. Slack has revolutionized all of that. It was acquired by Salesforce for nearly $28 billion in December of 2020, and it continues to thrive with over 200,000 paid customers in more than 150 countries, including 80% of Fortune 100 companies. At peak times, Slack delivers 300,000 messages per second, and on average, 4.7 billion messages are sent in Slack each week. Jamie has been with Slack for 7 years, leading various product roles, and is now the VP of Product for self-serve. Before Slack, she spent 7 years at Etsy, rising from customer support to Director of Product. Welcome to the Product Podcast, Jamie.
Thanks. Carlos, I'm excited to be here.
Jamie, what's your most common emoji on Slack?
Oh, I've done this a few times. I think almost always it ends up being something that promotes other people's work. So there's one we have that's just like a hand, like this. Like I just say like, yes, this. Or pluses, lots of pluses. I tend to be a big cheerleader for other folks.
You know, we added some custom emojis in our internal Slack with people's faces.
Oh, yeah.
And that's such a good way to celebrate them.
Absolutely. I love those.
But one of the things that I noticed, and I'm an emoji user too, is that some of people in the younger generation, they just don't think it's cool. And they're trying to express themselves with stickers, voice notes, or other forms of communication. So curious to see if you've noticed any of those trends.
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's definitely the normal emoji, like the set that kind of ships with your phone. People don't think that's cool. Like it's very millennial to give a thumbs up. But I think like the ability to create custom emoji inside of Slack helps people feel like it can still be relevant. We still see tons and tons of emoji coming up, not just for fun, but also like for real business use cases, which is cool. It ends up being a really powerful tool for communication.
So it actually helped me be more thankful in general. I remember when I was exchanging emails with people, like I would feel bad if I had to send an email copying everybody to say thank you.
Absolutely.
Or you're welcome.
Yeah.
and now just making it so easy to correspond without, bothering other people, I think it's just making us more polite.
Yeah, I think that's the same thing too when you're also like, you can be like, yes, like this is a great idea. Like I want to plus this. Like it is like, I remember, early in my career, we would have everyone at email chains and everyone would just reply being like, yay, yay, yay. Your whole inbox would just be like people being yay. And you'd be like, oh God, I have to kill this. But with emoji, it just kind of like all piles up and everybody can see it and feel good about it. So yeah, definitely.
So I see that you started as an English major and your first role at Etsy was in customer support.
Yes.
So how did you navigate that transition into product management without a traditional technical background or MBA?
Yeah. So I ended up in customer support because it was just very hard to find jobs in 2010, 2008 to 2010. And customer support was better than a barista job in terms of health insurance and like stability. So I took the job in customer support at Etsy because I wanted to be around creative people. And I've always been a very inquisitive person. And I'm also kind of a control freak. So when I was at Etsy in customer support and I was getting all these emails about how the product wasn't working or the site would be down or people wanted to be able to just like shut down their account without having to talk to me. Those problems really frustrated me. And I became really curious about how the whole rest of the company worked. I didn't like it that there was an outage and I didn't understand how the internet really worked. So I became really good friends with a lot of software engineers, I think is part of it. And they helped me get enough of the basics to point me in the right direction. So I ended up taking like a CS 50 class, like Harvard had a class online at the time to learn the basics of computer science. I had like a Python for Dummies book and like taught myself some Python. I learned how like the internet worked, like with everything from like learning like what Akamai was, because Akamai would sometimes go down back then also, and we would be like, oh no, what are we gonna do? So I needed to know what Akamai was. But I first I started, I think, with like more of a technical background because I was just surrounded by engineers. It was really easy. And then I found this person that was a product manager, and I like remember being like, what is it that you do? And he explained what he did to me, and I was like, that's the job I want. I want that job. So I kind of had that brewing in the back of my head. And I just started to be the person who, would take a complaint, like a customer complaint, or maybe a complaint we even had on the customer support side, and I would pull that into a set of things that the engineers could do, product requirements, and I would like hand it off. But I was still doing all of that at the same time that I was doing my normal job. So a lot of it involved, to be really honest, like actually working like 14-hour days to try to like get all my work done and then do all of the stuff that I also thought was really fun. But I was, in my early 20s, so that was easy, fine for me. And then once I started to kind of get into product, not officially having the title, but doing a lot of the work, I also realized there was a lot of other stuff I needed to learn. I needed to learn about marketing, and I needed to learn about business, and I wanted to do experimentation because we were at Etsy. It's a very experiment-driven place, so I needed to learn about statistics. And I just listened to a lot of audiobooks about everything from design to stats to how Google started, to learn as much as I could about everything that I didn't know anything about. And then I leaned on the things that I did know. So when I transitioned into product management, I was actually working in policy at the time. And my first projects were supporting the policy operations team. So it was transaction dispute systems. It was pages to help people understand what handmade was. So I leaned on the expertise that I did have, even though I didn't know anything about product management. I did know a lot about this whole part of the business that needed product support. So, yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
I like that takeaway for me, like leveraging what you have, even if it's not officially a product management title, and using it to your advantage to show value to, in this case, the product team. I noticed another interesting transition in your career. You spent around 7 years in Etsy, and then you moved into Slack. And Etsy is an e-commerce marketplace, I would say, right? Well,
yes, yeah.
Slack seems more like a B2B SaaS communications platform. So how were you able to transition some of that product management expertise to a very different type of product?
Yeah, for sure. So my initial role at Slack was in search and machine learning. And most of the product work that I did at Etsy was also in search and machine learning. So for me, I was like, okay, I got this. I got search and machine learning. I'm going to take that and I'm going to do it in a totally different domain because I didn't want to keep working on e-commerce. I was like, I could go to another marketplace or a D2C. I know how to sell stuff, but I don't really want to do that right now. I wanted to learn a bunch more. So that was really the link for me was like, I know how to build search products. I know how to build machine learning products, and everything else is totally brand new. It ended up actually being much more challenging than I anticipated because the data environment inside of a B2B company is so different than the data environment inside of a B2C company. The fundamental difference is, when you're shopping on Etsy or Amazon or, browsing on Google and Amazon and Etsy, they own your data, basically. Like, that's kind of the agreement. But at Slack, the customer owns the data. So we couldn't look at things like what are the top queries very easily. Whereas at Etsy, I could just pull that down. If people were having trouble finding stuff in search at Etsy, I could open up a tool and see exactly what people are doing step by step. What did they search for and what results came back, and use that to debug. At Slack, I didn't have any of that. So it was much more challenging than I anticipated it being. But you also have the opportunity to have a much richer relationship with your customers because somebody is paying you. And when they're paying you a subscription, they have a vested interest in what you're building. So I found that to be super rewarding, being able to actually chat with a customer, sometimes even in a Slack channel, to better understand what they needed. And I have also found that, in a two-sided marketplace, a lot of the conversations we would have would be like, are the sellers our customers? Are the buyers our customers? Who are we actually doing this for? And I think at the end of the day, we resolved that, we're trying to get sellers more sales. That's mostly what we're trying to do. But sometimes it could feel like you were adversarial with your users. Sometimes you make a change and a seller didn't really like it. For instance, at Slack, I've felt the vast majority of the time that our interests are always aligned with our users. Our users might have very different opinions, and then you have a whole other problem, which is, some people really like something, some people really hate something. That happens all the time. But we're always trying to move in the same direction as our users. And something about that has been, it's just very good for me, I think, as a product manager. Yeah.
And you were at Slack before and after Salesforce acquisition. And in product, it's always this important decision we have to make between buying versus building. And Salesforce chose to buy for around $28 billion. So what do you think was the rationale to do that versus trying to build their own platform?
So I don't know if you know, but Salesforce has tried to build a lot of chat tools in the past. Chatter exists and is used by people on a regular basis. Salesforce also purchased Quip early before they purchased Slack. I think the thesis behind that was sort of similar. It's a tool that everyone uses, a collaboration layer, and it could get more people using the system of record data that is inside of Salesforce. I think when, Salesforce looked at Slack and was like, this is actually, not only is it like a chat tool that's has a really strong footprint across, sort of the top of the Fortune 500. It's got a lot of traction, but it's also a platform. Salesforce is a platform company first and foremost, and I think they saw a lot of affinity in our platform, and they saw an opportunity for a different kind of experience for every user inside of a company to get access to the insights and data that are happening inside of Salesforce. So that, I think is sort of like well, we could expand, not only just be for the sales team or not only be for the service team, but we could be for the whole company. We could be the engagement layer for how the whole company accesses all of the data that they need to get their job done. It can update data, get data back out. I think that was really sort of the benefit that the Salesforce side saw. And on our side, we are very excited to have a massive set of customers who are already using Salesforce who we think could really benefit from Slack, who might not be using it fully yet or might not have picked it up at all. So I think it kind of comes down to like Slack is really, really good at user experience and the sort of product led motion. And Salesforce is really good at getting software into companies. Like they're super, super good at that. So ideally, it's a match made in heaven, and Salesforce helps get Slack, the good product, into more hands, and that gets more people access to all of the other stuff that is already happening inside of their Salesforce instance.
Totally. I mean, Salesforce has the playbook. They've been doing it with other companies, and they are literally the platform of platforms. Exactly. Because in a way, I also think of Slack as a platform in itself.
Yeah.
So what was the most challenging part for you as you had to navigate this integration and make sure that there's actually value for everybody involved?
Yeah, so I think there have been multiple phases of the integration, and the place that we're at right now is really, I kind of think about it as more of like the final stages of Slack becoming a part of Salesforce. There's a lot more connectivity. We talk a lot more about how to make Salesforce, the experience of using Salesforce inside of Slack, feel a lot more native. I think we started off with like a very platform approach, and then we've gotten to a place where we want to make our platform better, but we also want to make sure that the Salesforce experiences are just absolutely stellar. I think a lot of the challenges have been, one, small company, big company. It's just like Slack was, 3,000 people-ish, something like that when we were acquired. It happened during COVID. So that was also like, we didn't actually have a ton of face-to-face time with people. So it was really easy to kind of think about ourselves as like a little island inside of this like massive 80,000 person company. And now I have a lot more touch points with them. So there's a lot more contact with the rest of the Salesforce organization. There's a lot more going into the office. And I think that helps you see the other side of the company as like real people who are also good at their jobs. And I think early on it was a lot more, you guys do your thing and we'll do our thing, and like maybe we'll talk to you someday. But now I think one of the things that I really enjoy about my current role leading the self-service organization is that this is a totally different motion for Salesforce. They're really good at sales led. They started off, product led, but not for very long. Parker, our CEO, will even say like that didn't last very long. We very quickly moved to sales. So it's a new motion for a lot of people inside of Salesforce. And a lot of what I do on a daily basis is educating people about how a PLG motion works, how a product-led business is different than a sales-led business in terms of things like predictability and scale. So I think both the sort of the challenge and the opportunity is always figuring out how to have productive conversations where we can get the best out of both sides instead of kind of like digging in our heels on the thing that we're really good at. I think when we can actually have the conversation about what do you bring to the table and what do we bring to the table and how can we do that together, we end up with really awesome outcomes. But it's not always the first place people start, I think.
Exactly. And as you said, like Slack has been famous for having a really strong product-led growth motion.
Yeah.
While Salesforce has been very famous for having a very strong top-down sales-led motion. And you are the GM for self-serve. It's not just the VP of product. So are you responsible for like the P&L on self-serve?
So I'm not responsible for I'm responsible for the number. I'm not responsible for like the cost of every piece of the business. So I don't manage every single person. So I don't have the full headcount budget. I also am not fully responsible for the marketing budget, but I am responsible for making sure all of those teams work together, and I'm responsible for hitting our number every month and every quarter. And so a lot of what, I've taken on with the GM title is it's very similar to IC product responsibility, I would say, which is, I did a stint as a very senior IC right before taking this over. So it's something I have a lot of experience with. But I'm really responsible for creating this like virtual organization across marketing, operations, design, product, engineering, and even I also manage our help and localization and translation teams. So like that whole set of people who drives the self-service business, I'm responsible for making sure that they all know what we're doing. We're all aligned to the same strategy, that we can, with that strategy, ladder up to hit our number. And if we don't hit our number, that we have a plan to get the number later in the year, or to very much justify why that's not happening, which I think is very different, at least from the way that other product leaders operate inside of Slack.
So when you say you're responsible for hitting the number, you're talking about revenue?
Yeah, exactly.
This episode is brought to you by Epo, the next generation A/B testing and feature management platform built for modern growth teams by alums from Airbnb and Stitch Fix. With Epo, you can increase experimentation velocity while unlocking rigorous deep analysis. From setup to troubleshooting to analysis, Epo makes experimentation easy. An accessible UI makes it easy to dig into performance. And out-of-the-box reporting makes it easy for you to avoid annoying prolonged analytics cycles. Check out why companies like Twitch, Miro, and DraftKings rely on Epo. Visit getepo.com/product school and 10x your experiment velocity. That's getepo.com/product school. So here is the challenge that I see sometimes with companies that have different motions, like bottoms up and top down. You're responsible. How do you go about collaborating with the sales team to ensure that ultimately there is a big number that is for everybody, and that there are points where it's important for you to either go for the close or transition that opportunity to a human on the sales team?
Yeah. So this is very top of mind for us all of the time right now, because we have a very wonderful SMB sales team at Slack who are they're crushing their numbers all the time. They're doing great. But there's a very energized set of people who really want to go after the SMB market. And there's a lot of overlap, right? We could have a lot of channel conflict. So one of the things that we've done is actually set up a Slack channel where we have work streams where we're all trying to win as one, thinking about it as one company. Where do we get more efficiency on the product-led side, and where is it better to actually transition people over to invoice? And we try to set up incentives so that people get, benefit from actually growing accounts when they transition to invoice, rather than just moving money from one bucket to another. Another thing is our number is largely based on growth. So I'm not targeted on the total size of the business. I'm targeted on how much new business I'm bringing in. And that means that I can take some of my business and I can hand it over to the sales team and they can turn it into new business, but it doesn't show up as a loss in my number on the numbers I'm goaled against. So that helps a fair amount. And then a lot of it is also just sharing learnings and sharing approach. Having really good personal relationships with the sales leaders helps, because then you actually like have information flowing pretty frequently, and they're not, if they see something they're surprised by, maybe an offer that we're fielding out in the market, or someone on their team comes up against a challenge where they like the problem is always, if you could get a better deal on self-serve, it's going to disincentivize somebody from wanting to go with their salesperson, and sales really doesn't like that. And then on our side, we don't want sales going too far, too low, sort of into the market to lower opportunities where we think it would be more efficient for product-led growth to go. So we try to set up rules of the road and then do look back. So like, how did that work? Were those rules good this quarter? Did we lose out on some deals? Do we feel like the deal size shrank too much? And we're just beginning that process, but I think having just the mentality that we're really one team, not two teams helps a lot.
I agree. I think that's the key. And I believe that even in my current company and aligning those incentives. So there's a number that everybody as a team cares about. And then we can break it down into specific leading indicators, if you will. So in your case, in addition to revenue, what are other leading indicators that can help you ensure predictability?
Yeah, so we have a full funnel breakdown that we report on every week that goes from basically people going to the website, people clicking on create a team, people creating a team and adding a person, people buying. We have an activation metric in there. We don't measure that so much on a weekly basis. We look at it on a more like experimental basis, which is a leading indicator for propensity to pay. And we see how many people are paying, what is the amount of money we're getting per team, so that like price per seat times the number of seats, right? And then we also that'll get us to our new business number. And then we look at once you've actually created a team, how are you growing? So are we adding more seats? Are we losing seats? So we look at both the seat growth and the churn. We have a number called net paid seats that we look at pretty regularly. And then for things like AI, we're also selling that in a self-serve way, or people upgrading plans. So we look at that as well and have targets for those numbers. And we're always trying to add more steps in. We always want to have what are the leading indicators for churn, because it's easier to keep you from churning than it is to get you back after you churned. Or, what's the leading indicator that you're going to accept the trial? But sometimes it can be easy to have too many numbers, and then you don't know where to focus. So we try to think about all those things as inputs that are helpful more on an experimental basis than on like a obsessively tracking week to week basis.
Totally. And I see that with marketing all the time, with the attribution model. Like it's just so hard, even impossible to get the attribution model 100% accurate, that sometimes you have to place some bets and reverse engineer what are some of the winning patterns and how you can get more people to follow that specific pattern.
Exactly. Yeah.
In your case, Facebook was famous for having that aha moment where you had to invite 10 friends, right? Airbnb was famous for getting, I think it was 9 reviews on a property. That would showcase that property would get a lot of traction. Like, do you have any specific aha moments at Slack?
So funny. We've been spending so much time on our aha moments because the product has changed a lot in the past few years. So, I think when I started at Slack, almost 7 years ago, it was very much a chat tool. Like chat tool, some people got the platform, but it was almost entirely messaging for most people. And a lot of our activation metrics over time have really centered around messaging. So we know, like absolutely know, that you have to have people talking in Slack for it to be valuable. If you can't get a conversation going, you're not going to sort of like tip over into actually being successful. So that's why we have that created team with one joiner as like our first like initial activation metric. But that's not the aha moment. Then we have had so many other aha moments that we've looked at that were all really centered around how many people are talking and how frequently are they talking. That's been helpful, but I think a lot of that, the challenge I was having with that number is that it doesn't actually speak to the fullness and the richness of the product, particularly the fullness and the richness of the paid product, which includes things like huddles and canvases, and we just launched lists, and we've got workflow builder. Like there's so much more value. And if we just point you to chatting, there's not really that much need to pay for the product. If all you want to do is have real-time conversations with your friends, like it's not worth it. So I wanted to showcase the paid value a lot more. So we've actually shifted to a new metric that helps showcase the paid value. So we're looking at not only are you talking, because you still have to have the conversation going, but can we have 3 people using a productivity feature in the team in the first like 28 days, something like to get you activating on the paid product earlier. And that's a pretty big strategic shift for our team away from only thinking about messaging and messaging activity. And then maybe, someday you'll bump into a paid feature and you'll run a trial and then you'll want to upgrade. We really want to try to get people to shift how they're thinking about Slack early on in the journey instead of thinking about that as like, a very sophisticated usage of Slack.
I like what you mentioned about the expansion of your product or your platform, right? Yeah. From just a chatting tool to what you have. I noticed recently you launched a project management tool and you have Huddles, List, Canvas. So, but at the same time, in your own marketplace or ecosystem, you have third-party players that offer those features. So I'm curious to know more about how do you coexist with those type of players?
Yeah, I think we've like over time, we've really held on to this belief that people should use the best tools that work for them. So no one's going to have the exact same set of software. And so Slack needs to be an open platform. And the value that Slack brings is that we sort of take all of that software that you're using, there's over 1,000 apps, and pull it into one place. And that can be the place where you live all day, right? So you live inside of Slack, you maybe get notifications, you can take simple actions, you don't have to switch between all of your different software all the time. We've had a lot of success with the strategy for tech and dev teams. So, if you know how Slack apps work and you can build your own Slack app or you can leverage, the Slack apps for the things like PagerDuty that really speak to your needs as a developer, you're getting a lot of value out of Slack. But for non-tech and dev teams, a lot of the metaphors, the UX metaphors, UI metaphors that we have had in the platform are just really confusing to people. They don't know how to work with a chatbot, or at home is super confusing. Why does that look like a person, but it has UI behind it? And so as we thought about bringing in things like Canvas and lists, a lot of it is just to make the stuff that's happening inside of Slack, that engagement layer for all of your other software, much more understandable. It's really hard to think about, if you say when I was working in search, we would talk about the Slack is the searchable log of all knowledge and conversation inside of your company, which is true. There's a ton of data in there. But it's not always consumable, especially if it's just scroll back inside of a channel. So Canvas makes a ton of sense because you can pull stuff out of a channel, and now you have a very lightweight way of understanding what's important. Canvas isn't going to do every single thing that a Google Doc does. It's not trying to be a document. It's not going to do every single thing that even a wiki like Atlassian product is going to do. That's not its job. It's not trying to specialize in being the best wiki ever. It's trying to specialize in being the place that you can find information that's important to you about the project that you're working on. Similarly with lists, we're not trying to be an Excel spreadsheet. We just want to make sure that it's easy to keep track of the stuff that you're talking about in your channel and to keep track of the tasks that are happening inside of your other software. So one of the benefits that we bring to all of these products and where we think about investing is, what things really benefit from temporality, so they're current, and engagement. Those things, we've got the eyeballs, we've got you in Slack, you're already checking Slack all the time. Can we add a little bit more richness to our functionality to make it easier to just understand what's happening, or communicate with the other people on your team? And then we think about how do we connect all those things. So, Canvas should work with third-party tools. Lists, we want to have list integrations that work with all of the other systems of record that you might be using. So it's not going to replace every single job, but let's say you're an SMB, you're a tiny company, you have a very limited software budget, and you're trying to decide, can I just use Slack, or do I need to use a wiki product and use a project management product? You could probably just use Slack. You probably don't need to also buy a video conferencing software for your 8-person team. You could use Slack. But if you're a massive enterprise, we're not going to fit every single one of your needs for video conferencing with huddles. That's not what we're trying to do. So I think we try to focus on that engagement of a small team first and foremost, and making sure that they have robust tools for communication, robust tools for getting work done, and that it can plug in with a lot of other tools that specialize in some of those jobs to be done.
This strategy reminds me of the things I've seen do Amazon or OpenAI do, or even Apple. They have a marketplace.
Yeah.
They see what's selling and what's working, and eventually they decide to build some of those features or products themselves while still allowing third-party vendors to offer theirs. And I think it makes, in your case, makes a lot of sense for those SMBs and companies that are starting from scratch, because they need a lot of these things and probably a simple version. Yeah. But now thinking about those large enterprises that already have other type of technology, how do you go about integrating with some of your products and making sure that you can eventually gain some share in their product stack?
Yeah, so I think the two biggest like sort of benefits we have in terms of gaining share, like I was saying, the eyeballs. So we got people already like checking this thing pretty regularly. And the second thing is customization, and specifically customization at the end user level. So I don't know how much you've used Slack Workflow Builder, but we're making it better all of the time. And our target on Workflow Builder is not, low code, no code people on the IT team. It's like the manager of we call them little T teams sometimes, but it's the manager of like a little squad who's like, everybody knows you have to use Jira, right? Like, I always used to say on my teams that like the fact that everybody hates Jira is a feature and not a bug, because then you don't end up with arguments like somebody really likes Asana and somebody really likes Trello and somebody just found this new thing that we got to use this week. Everybody hates Jira. It's the great equalizer. It's the worst to use, but it does everything you need from like a sort of background, like big company. Like our Slack's usage is like so sophisticated. I have no idea what's going on in there most of the time. But everyone who uses Jira also probably has to maintain a spreadsheet somewhere, right? Like, because not everyone is checking Jira, because go back to the eyeballs thing. So I think when we think about customization at the end user level, it's how can I have my list that works super well with Jira, and then have it work with workflows in my Slack channel that actually reflect how my team works. So maybe I have a feedback channel, right? Where I just launched a feature internally and I'm trying to get feedback on product market fit. We're dog fooding it. We're drinking our own wine. I want to know what are the main issues people are running into. And then I want to be able to bop a button and have that create a ticket in Jira, but I want it to show up in my list. And I want that list to have a link to a message. And now I've got a whole workflow here where no one ever has to go to Jira. Jira is still the system of record, and it's going to update all of the widgets that it needs to update so everybody stays on track with the whole project overall, and we have that right burn down and all those other advanced features that Jira has. But we're staying inside of Slack for the rest of the team that needs to sort of collaborate around that data. And I think that's true for almost every one of those like big SaaS investments. Is there's a subset of people who need to work deeply in that tool. And then there's everybody else who needs to collaborate around the stuff that's in that tool, and no one wants to go there. So we can do a good job of sort of pulling off that top layer and then allowing you to build workflows and customizations that help people interact with it in the right way.
Yeah, I think that's the holy grail of B2B SaaS, because everybody tries to replace the spreadsheet, but what ends up happening is that everybody keeps the spreadsheet and adds another tool.
Yeah, exactly. I think this was in our S1 originally when we went public. Is we think that there's like a job to be done that's to be the interaction layer for everything else that you want to use all the time. I think that's still true in how we think about Slack, and the S1 is very ambitious about that being the most important software company of the next decade. So I think the market opportunity for Slack is still really, really big here.
I mean, in a way, like Slack was a great replacement or improvement from email. Mm-hmm. At least that's how I started using it. I was like, oh my God, like internally, we don't email. Sometimes people would email me, I take a screenshot and share it on Slack just to make a point that we message each other on Slack, right? But it's also could become the enemy in the future, right? Like as you were talking about Jira, like nobody really likes it, but everybody uses it. Yeah. With Slack now, particularly, I also have a ton of unread messages. So how do you, as a product leader, ensure that you can solve the problem, but also stay innovative and cool so people actually enjoy using your product?
Yeah. So we try to stay cool with things like huddles backgrounds. I'm joking, but actually I really love the huddles backgrounds. I think one of the things, before I get to the noise question, one of the things that is very baked into Slack's DNA is that using the software should be fun. And like it actually shows up in a lot of product requirement docs. I put it in most of my product requirement docs because we want it to actually be delightful. I'm like, that's actually like critical to the functionality of the product. If it's not delightful, it's not doing its job. So I think that just like being baked into the culture is really helpful. On noise specifically, it's funny that, for some people, I think this is a new problem. For Slack, inside of Slack, this is a very old problem. When I was first interviewing back in 2017, my whole interview around search and machine learning was really like, how do you help people quiet the noise, find the right information? I spent a lot of time in those first couple of years trying to build products that could help. I was very obsessed with this idea of information fit and how do we like point the right people to the right data at the right time so they can get their job done more effectively. I think this is like one of those things that you have to never lose sight of. You have to continually keep it in sort of your crosshairs because the problem is never going to go away. The more people use Slack, the more work is happening, the bigger companies get, like noise is always going to be an issue. And it's not something that you just solve in one fell swoop and say like, oh, we're done with that. It's an always on problem. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think we think a lot about there's simple solutions, right? Things like what's the default notification for a channel? How do we help people understand that like, maybe you don't have to read every single Slack message. And what is our product telling you about how you should interact with it? Is it giving you anxiety and making you feel like, oh my God, I have 76 unreads. I'm like way behind. Or are we saying like, 76 messages were written while you were gone, but you need to read these 3. So I think there's like simple things we can do around notifications. We've done a lot of that. Activity, I think, has done a lot to sort of elevate the things that you actually need to look at, that your app mentions, replies in thread, DMs being sort of separate also kind of gives you like a place to kind of be quiet and not look at all the channels. But there's so much more that we can do. Obviously it's a thing that we're really focused on right now. And AI has a big role to play here too. So a lot of our AI products are actually also focused on this, like, how do I help people pay attention to the right stuff? We launched recaps earlier this year, which takes sort of the ability for you to say, like, all of these channels, I don't actually care about reading them that frequently, but I do kind of want to know what's going on. So I want them to roll up into a digest. And I can read that once a day. I could read it once a week. But that sort of idea of like giving you a way to say like, this stuff, not that important to me. I think we need to keep pursuing that. We also need to do a better job of helping you find the stuff that is important to you. Because if everything is noisy, then how are you going to find anything, right? So I think that as we look at like what's next for us in noise reduction, that like highlighting what's most important, is something we have better tools to do than we did 7 years ago when I was first trying to look at this with machine learning and using the normal sort of stuff you look at, like who's clicking on a message, who's like engaging with the message, like that stuff doesn't work inside of Slack. You have to have a whole different way of thinking about it.
Yeah, and I'm going to geek out with you on this because I'm a power user and also very opinionated. So with email, so I was able to give access to my assistant, and I'm privileged for having opportunity of having another person help me prioritize certain things. With Slack, I didn't have that option, right? So I still had to do it myself. And at some point, like having a summary would be very helpful, and I'm already using AI. So it's already there. It's still only helping me with the AI so with the Slack conversation. So I hear you on like the opportunity of feeding other conversations and information around the entire ecosystem. But I drive. And like sometimes I actually ask what is it? Apple CarPlay. Hey, read me my emails. And that was actually good. I was able to respond and text as well. So eventually, I hope I can do the same with Slack, because my life is on Slack.
I'll take the feature request back. We'll tell the team for sure. I'll see if I can get your CarPlay integration on the roadmap.
But let's talk about AI. I think that's also like a big opportunity. I noticed that you're actually monetizing AI. Mm-hmm. Like most of the SaaS platforms I've seen out there, Superhuman or Notion, Coda, they all have their own AI superpowers as part of their sometimes free or paid plan, but there is not like an add-on. And I noticed that in Slack, you charge for that separately. So I'd love to learn more about your rationale behind that.
Yeah. So I think there's really two parts to the rationale for charging. One is the value that we think we're giving the customer. So I think this is like the most important one, which is we have a lot of data inside of Slack. If you're a company that's been using Slack for years, there's just a mountain of information inside of Slack. Much more, I would venture, than what's in your Notion and what's in your Asana or your Miro. This is like actually kind of a database for your company, even though it might not feel that way. And so the part of what we're doing with our AI product is giving you access to all of that data that we're already storing. And I think when you think about AI products or machine learning products historically, a lot of where the cost has come from is in the data processing and the data management and the value you're getting from that data, right? So I remember looking at SaaS products for AI. Everyone charged you by data or by query. And so I think, value per interaction that you're getting from Slack, I think it's higher, honestly, than it is for a lot of those other tools. The other thing is, that this is also a thing that it costs money. It just does cost money. So when we were thinking about how do we make the best possible product for customers, and incentivize ourselves to continue to innovate in the space, continue to deliver what we think is really head and shoulders value above some of those other tools based on the quality of the data that we have access to. We wanted to make sure that all of our incentives are sort of swimming in the right same direction. And I think also one thing I would say is, you kind of just alluded to this as we were talking about recaps, but I think that there's an opportunity for Slack AI to not just help you get more out of your conversations in Slack, help you save time. It does do that, but to also help you just get information, insight that you wouldn't otherwise have. And we know that people spend an inordinate amount of their time at work searching, and they spend way too much time switching between applications. So I think, as we think about how do we continue to innovate in the AI, deliver value against, the product that we're charging for, because we're not done, we're going to keep putting a bunch of stuff in there. We're really thinking about how do we help you get more out of your data, again, in the place where the eyeballs already are. Slack is a perfectly natural place to have something like an assistant experience, right? You wake up, you check your Slack. That's what you do. What are you going to do that day? What meetings do you have? What's the most important thing for you to pay attention to? I think there are opportunities for Slack AI to help with all of those things in a way that maybe someone at Notion would tell you differently, but I don't really see Notion AI having the same set of data to work from, and also place in a user's life that Slack has. So I think, to me, it's what value are we creating now, and what value are we going to add in the future? And we really think it's enough to say, hey, maybe we should charge a little bit more. I also think Slack is generally speaking, it's pretty affordable, and we tend to try to put all of the features into existing plans. We don't raise prices very frequently. So we didn't want to raise the base price for everyone out of the gate, particularly because it's not a totally proven feature yet. We wanted to see where we could get on product market fit. And then we can always reevaluate. But raising the price for everybody just to be able to get some innovation moving on the feature didn't also feel like the right thing to do.
Another question about pricing, as we see more and more teams, not just product teams, but teams in general, being reduced because now they can be more efficient due to AI. And a lot of the B2B SaaS companies, they base their pricing on seats. Yep. And I see more of a transition to usage, especially if that company has less seats. How are you thinking about pricing your product?
So in the self-serve business, we price both based on seats and on usage. So we're already there. We have a fair billing practice where if you don't use the product in a month, you don't get charged for that seat. So it's a little bit of both things happening at the same time. I think going back to the beginning of Slack, early conversations with Stuart back in the day, there's always been a focus on delivering more value than we charge people for. And so I think that's where we tend to kind of try to live, is in that place. That's where the fair billing practice comes in on the self-serve business. There are other places where we've played around with usage-based pricing. So on our workflow builder, we have a concept of usage-based pricing. I think it's always something that it's come into the conversations, but there's also a desire to maintain simplicity and predictability. And so I think deciding where you do seats and where you do metered usage, it depends on what is actually the thing the value that you're delivering to the user. So something like, database usage, queries per second, that kind of thing, it probably makes more sense to charge based on usage than number of seats who have access to it. But for something like Slack, which is a really broadly based tool, I don't want to charge you based on something like the number of messages you send. That'd be insane. And we probably don't want to charge you based on data storage either, because we want to incentivize you to really get more out of the archive, and we want more of that data to be available for you and your AI model later. So, I think you always have to think about what kinds of incentives you're setting up for yourself and for the business. We don't want people paying for a bunch of seats that they're not using, and we also don't want people to use the product less because they're worried about having to pay for it. So we try to think about both of those things together.
And that's why I like product teams owning the number, as well as the pricing and go-to-market decisions, because ultimately you want to balance those different dimensions. And we saw that with PLG. There are companies that do free trials, others that would do freemium. Yeah. You do both. And sometimes the answer is actually both. And having someone who understands both sides of the equation makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
and I think, we use different things for, we've found in the past 6 months since I've kind of stepped into this role on the PLG team that you can use different things for different things. You can use the freemium product for something completely different than the trials is actually used for. And that could be beneficial to your business overall. So it's a lot of fun actually being able to play with these different levers when you're responsible for the number.
And Jamie, how do you structure your team to ensure that you have enough resources allocated to AI and the future, enough resources allocated to core features and other things that you have?
Yeah, so luckily I am not responsible for resourcing across the entire product org at Slack. That is a nightmare. I empathize with regularly because there's always so much really great stuff to do. But inside of my organization, I kind of have broken it into 3 parts of the funnel. So there's awareness and consideration, there's paying, and then there's growing. And when we think about, how are we allocated across these different pillars of the product-led growth motion, I think about, what do we have stacked in for the quarter? It really kind of just looks like you're looking at a P&L. It's what are the experiments that we have in play, or the big bets that we have in terms of the business that we have in play? Do we have those all staffed correctly? If we hit those things, are we projected to hit our number? If not, like, let's figure out how to shuffle things around. Also, we look at organic trends. So let's say, people are expanding at a much higher rate than we expected them to. Maybe then we shift a little bit more into new. Or maybe we say the opposite thing and say, wow, that's a trend. We want to see if we can juice it. So I try to we have these pillars, and then we try to have flexibility on the projects quarter to quarter. And I treat that like growth and new business and then expansion business. I treat that set of people as kind of like, that's my core staff. We all operate with, that's the first team mentality. And if, one of the areas is doing really well or needs more resourcing, we have the conversations there. There's always the expectation that everyone will be doing what's right for the whole business, not what's right just for their organization. And so far, it's been great. I haven't had any like major issues. Except to say that everyone always needs more people. So we say that all the time.
Always. and more money.
Exactly. More people, more money, more time. Everyone always.
So how big is your overall team?
Everyone together, sort of all baked in, is like between 100 and 200 people, including like engineering, product design, etc. My org, so I manage a set of, let me count, 9, I think there's 9 PMs. And then I also have the localization and translation team, as well as the help and learning team. So there's like a little ops org inside of my org as well.
But Jamie, loved chatting with you, learning more about how you're thinking about product. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been great.